TV.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Pastor Mai, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. We don't have royalty on the Isle of Man. We have a representative of the monarch on the Isle of Man in the Lieutenant Governor. But the man on Mannin Line today for many years was christened, if I can put it that way, the unofficial King of Castletown. Member of the House of Keys for 30-odd years. Latterly Chief Minister from 2006 to 2011. Tony Brown, Pastor Mai, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Andy.
How many times have you returned unopposed in Castletown?
Twice.
And did you take that as a compliment?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the Isle of Man politics, it's very easy for anyone to stand as an independent. You don't have to put any money up front. And it's up to you how much you spend on an election campaign. So, yes, I took it as a considerable honour that I had that trust from the people of Castletown.
And 30-odd years, and in 30 years, in fact, I'll ask you later on, but just prepare, this is going to be one of the final questions, your proudest moment and your biggest achievement in 30 years. I want, first of all, to go to the state of Castletown, and the fact is, my two cousins were over last week, and I did the tourist guide bit of taking people around the Isle of Man, and they absolutely loved Castletown. They loved the ambience of the square, the swings on the front, looking out to sea and what have you. And I just found out that didn't just happen. That didn't even happen recently. What are the roots of the way Castletown's looking this summer?
Well, I mean, the basis, just to come back to Castletown, is that, of course, Castletown developed as the capital of the Isle of Man, and therefore its format and layout is quite unique, based on the castle, centred on the castle, and the only place in the Isle of Man that can do it quite like that. And it's always had a marketplace that then became the market square, and the parade, which of course is in front of what used to be the garrison church, which is where the soldiers used to literally parade when they were stationed in Castletown Castle. And in about 2012, 2013, the square was rejuvenated by having it all relaid out, restricting traffic in the square. In fact, it goes back further than that, because when I was Minister of Transport, I stopped the traffic going around the Smelt, using it as a roundabout. And the basis for that was, one, that I didn't think it was necessary. Secondly, we were doing some works in Castle Street and were able to slightly widen the roadway at the top end of Castle Street where it approaches the parade, to enable cars to pass without having difficulty. It's tight, but it is passable. And that meant we didn't have to have vehicles going around the Smelt Monument. And it meant that when we wanted to close the square off for events or anything, we could do that quite easily. And also, of course, an ultimate aim was to get to the stage where during the summer months, my view was that we could close the square off to enable it to be used for the benefit of the community and visitors alike, by having attractions and events and entertainment on in the square during the day and evening without the need to close off the square.
It looks fantastic. I mean, it looks extremely amenable. It looks very inclusive as well. And they've done a great job. Where does the money come from? Is this the commissioners or is it central government?
Well, I think the Commissioners has done a great job in terms of laying out the square. I think there's a need to do more to provide entertainment and attractions, if you like, at certain times. I mean, whether it could be done every day, I think, is questionable, but certainly at weekends and an odd time during the week. And sometimes some of the larger things have been part funded by government. So between government and the Commissioners, the square is being used in a way that's different than its old history. It's being used for the benefit of the community. And I do know that many parents enjoy being there because it's near the shops. They're happy that the children can enjoy themselves in a safe area, really. But I do think that when you get to the winter months, then the square should revert back to being providing parking for the shops and retail outlets in Castletown.
If you want to get in touch, if you want to get a message to Tony Brown or talk to Tony Brown, call 66 13 68. Lines are open. Text 166 177. Email studio@manxradio.com and WhatsApp 166 177. So I know you watch politics very keenly, Tony Brown. The state of the Isle of Man at the moment is we have politicians talking about the state of our reserves being critical and everybody talking about watching pennies. Now, for many years, the money taps were fully open on the Isle of Man. There was lots and lots of money. How do you view the situation now?
Well, I think just to go back a little bit, because you mentioned previously, I mean, within the government's general reserve, it had something like nearly £700 million. That was when I was there and left, and that had been built up over about 25 years of investment and creating an environment that meant we could put money in reserve. And quite a substantial amount of that money has been reduced, and I understand that there is concern about the amount of reserves, but the actual income is still outstripping the expenditure, mainly, I think, because we have the Common Purse Agreement, which supplements us. Although I have to say now the Common Purse Agreement, as we call it, isn't as effective as it used to be. I think the UK treat us unfairly on that, and always did do when I was in negotiations. I made the point that, you know, with the internet and people purchasing online, then in fact the Isle of Man should get a share of the VAT that's collected from those purchases. And the UK never accepted that, and so we had to deal with it. They were the bigger partner. And at one stage, whether we go further in terms of our future with that relationship, I think is a matter of time and how things develop. But I think that a concern seems to be that whilst the island seems to be happy to invest substantially off island, the Liverpool dock area, and for example, rightly have invested in a new ship. There's lots of investments that are going on. There seems to be a reluctance to invest within the island for the island's infrastructure relating to tourism and to heritage, which are interlinked in terms of the visitors come to the island. We look out the window here, there's a cruise ship in again. Maybe 2,000 people come off that cruise ship to come into the island. We had a bigger one last week, and the island was, you know, had 3,000 people touring around. And unless our heritage sites and our places are clean and tidy and up to standard, they will go back with a poor impression. At the moment, I think that we get away with it, but there are a number of areas where there is a need for investment to improve the quality of the product we have.
I'm sure Manx National Heritage will say, in fact I've heard them say, that they get the foot of treasury on their neck, and Manx National Heritage have to play the cards that they're dealt. And I've heard them say their biggest expenditure is people. So, I mean, Manx National Heritage have a tough game at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think they've been treated unfairly. I mean, I've made this point before. They are being underfunded for what government really expects them to do. Just an example, in Castletown, outside of Manx Grand Prix Week and TT Week, if you want to go into the grammar school, the Old House of Keys or the Nautical Museum, you have to do that by appointment. That's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. If you're a visitor and you're with your family in the car and you turn up in Castletown, yes, you can get in the castle, and you're being told there's all these other facilities. You don't want to make an appointment to say when you want to go and visit them. You want to go and visit them while you're in the town. And it makes no sense. I doubt if there's anywhere else in this sort of relationship within, for example, the UK and certainly within Ireland, where you'd have to make an appointment to go into what is a general tourist attraction stroke heritage site. So I have great sympathy for Manx National Heritage, because I do think they're being underfunded in their revenue terms, which means they can't employ staff to man the sites, which makes no sense at all. And also there is a lack of support and vision to invest in their capital schemes, and I think that's a problem too. We've got the PEGI, which is only now starting to raise its head as in terms of a scheme for it, but government's still only saying it's going to fund half of it, Well, the other half is unlikely to come from the private sector because the amount is too high. And from an Isle of Man point of view, these investments are not only in the tourist product, i.e. providing sites for people to come and visit who come to the island, but they're also important for our own heritage, for us as Manx people, to know what our history is, it's unique, and what we have. And also you're safeguarding our history. Everywhere around us, they're investing hundreds of millions of pounds every year into heritage. In the Isle of Man, we're investing next to nothing.
Okay, right, let's go to the lines. David's first on now. David, hi, you're live with Tony Brown.
Hi, Tony, and Andy too there. Just two questions, simple questions for me as far as I'm concerned. And I know a lot of people will be listening today, and a lot of them will be from Onken, because I told them I was coming on. And I just wanted to ask Tony, through you, Andy, is it a concern now that the government, per se, or the Council of Ministers, are now actively pursuing reserves to fund projects? And can we fund some of the projects we've got, or where do we go for the future? And the second question would be, and I'll leave it alone then, should all members of government take an active role within government? I see them using the excuse now of not being in the department, so they can't be caught to say, I didn't vote on that, so I was out of it.
Right, hi David. Yes, I've been told by quite a few Onken people that you're coming on to talk to me today, so I was well prepared. Anyway, great to hear from you. If I take the first question, this, of course, these are my views as a individual now, not as a politician. But in fact, investing your reserves within the island, to me, is not a sort of issue that causes concern. If we invest some of our reserves in capital projects to create things that generate income and support different industries, then that's a good thing. If we don't do that, we leave our reserves just invested in the economy of other countries to generate interest. So I think that, you get that balance right. You keep your reserve as much as you can, but you also use it to invest within the product, what we call the Isle of Man. And, we do know that the Isle of Man is in a situation where the vast majority of the industries are not now tourism, but we shouldn't therefore ignore the benefit of our tourism and our heritage products. They're critically important to enhancing what we have to attract people to come to the Isle of Man, and I think if we invest in that properly so that the standards and the quality of what we have is good, then that will benefit us in the longer term. As far as the issue of members of Tynwald being in government, I mean, that clearly is a personal choice. I do think, and I've always been of this view, you know this when you were a member, I do think that members should be willing and want to play a part in government to actually influence how policies are developed and how things happen. I think the new pay structure has damaged that. I think there is no logic at all in a member working in a department getting a certain amount of pay, and a member who doesn't work in a department getting exactly the same pay. You now have a situation where some members are judging that in fact there's no logic in being in government, because if you're not in government you have less work, you can deal with your constituents in a different way, and there is no benefit really from, this is some of their perspectives I suspect, in being within the government. My view is that if you're not in government you can't really influence how it actually does things.
Okay, final word, David. Oh, he's gone. Sorry. Okay, Alison, a message in now. What does Mr. Brown think of the way ministers appear to have no power to change things in their department? Is that a fair view? Was it ever thus?
No, I mean, ministers have all the power. The minister is the department, and what the minister says goes. What a minister cannot do is break the law. What he cannot do is expend money that he has no right to expend. But all the powers that the minister requires are set out in legislation. And if a minister says, I want that to happen, and it's legal, it has to happen. If it doesn't happen, then I'm afraid that fault lies with the minister.
A message in now from Mr. Brown is absolutely right. The railways, trams, heritage sites should be prioritised, not reduced. In Castletown, there seems to be a desire to demolish buildings. Is that true? Is anything being knocked down in
Well,
Castletown? Oh, what's happening with the fire station?
Oh, well, maybe that's what the person is referring to, the fire station. At the moment, the fire station is being used as a store. This is the former fire station in the town centre opposite the town hall. I came out recently expressing concern that the commissioners had decided to, as a first step, seek planning permission to demolish the site when there is no strategy or policy as to how they're going to redevelop the site. And to me, whether or not you demolish it is a later issue, not an initial issue. And the only reason they need planning permission to demolish, of course, is because it's within the conservation area. And at the end of the day, I'm realistic enough to know that the fire station is basically a garage. But I think there is a benefit that should be properly examined before the commissioners get to the stage of what they think they should do on the site.
Okay, a message in now from, this is Texter 623. My word, we miss Tony as an MHK, a complete contrast to our current members. He's quite right, MNH is underfunded. In response to David's comment about members being in departments, it's easy to resign from a role when you still gain the same annual salary as an MHK every year, than by playing to the gallery. A gesture a few months ago from a Castletown MHK makes no difference at all, other than the meaning he was doing less work for the same salary. And this texter says, I elect my MHKs to make a difference, not to make a gesture. Tony?
Yeah, well, I used to take the view quite simply. When I was elected as an MHK, I had 5 years to have an impact on the Isle of Man. And hopefully I would get re-elected. But what I knew at that stage was, all being well, I had 5 years to influence and do things to benefit the people and benefit the island. And I think, and I hope that the majority of our members of Tynwald still have that same view. I'm not sure the benefits to an individual member of being outside of government, how that benefits them and their constituents. You're not compromised in the way that some say, because if you're on a department, you're not tied to that department to the extent that you have to do absolutely everything it says. There are guidelines in where you have flexibility, and certainly where your constituency may well be compromised, you have the ability either to step out of the matter that's being dealt with or voting against it, as long as the minister advised in advance. Our system, because we don't have a party political government system, is flexible, and it should be flexible because members are independently elected. They're not elected by a party on a party ticket. And if you don't have that flexibility, you end up in a position where members will do what some are doing, which is stepping out. That is not, to me, good for the Isle of Man.
And again, lots of people seem to have the idea that, and putting it, if you like, a UK matrix, a UK system on the Isle of Man, and bringing party politics into the Isle of Man. What's your view about that?
Well, to be blunt, whether or not we have party politics will be a matter for the people to decide at some stage in the future. My personal view, as somebody who worked 30 years within the system, and, you know, you're alone, whatever people think, I was a single-seat constituency member, you're one person working and persuading members to support things that you think are important to your constituency or important to the Isle of Man. Yes, there's a collective called the Council of Ministers. They are there to give a lead and to make sure government operates effectively. And the ministers individually are meant to do that through their departments. And civil servants are there to serve the people of the Isle of Man. They're there to ensure that whatever is decided politically is actually implemented. It's not for them to judge whether or not it should be implemented. Once the decision's made, that's the political decision. Tynwald members are there to hold to account the Chief Minister and the ministers. The House of Keys are there to pass legislation, which in itself holds to account the policies of the government if they decide to pass legislation. So there's lots of safeguards in there, and our system has developed over decades, and especially since the ministerial system came in, to provide safeguards for the public. Ultimately, the members of Tynwald and the ministers have to be and are answerable in totality to the people of the Isle of Man, and the people have to make them answerable to the points that they think are important to them.
Okay, a message in from Brett, sent it in this week, who says, can Mr. Brown offer a solution to when Castle Rushen High School is going to be built?
Well, I think the answer to that is no, and I think this is a real problem. There seems to be a lack of certainty on pretty straightforward contracts. I spent most of my political life actually heading up politically contracts for developments in the Isle of Man. And I can't understand why there continues to be this delay. And also the uncertainty about, are we or are we not going to replace the swimming pool? Well, of course we should. Why would you take away a regional facility like a swimming pool attached to a school, a secondary school? When I was a child, we didn't have swimming pools in that sense, so we didn't learn to swim. My son, when he was at school, learned to swim. My daughter did. They were taught at school how to swim. We have water all around us. They need to know how to deal with it. So I can't understand why there are so many delays on just getting on with the job of making a decision, putting the money in the budget, which you do over a period of time, and getting on with the development. At the end of the day, most of these borrowings are done through government using its own resources, the money that we've generated over years, and it's a good investment. What can be a greater investment than investing in our children?
So what's the logjam? And again, the layperson will look at this from the outside and we see obfuscation all around. First of all, it was the land, and the land was zoned and everything. So what is the problem? Is it lack of money? Is it lack of intent? Lack of will? Where's it gone wrong?
I think the honest answer is none of us really know. I certainly don't really know. It just doesn't seem to be moving in a way it should be. It's been talked about. They've had plans drawn up, as I understand it, some years ago. Somebody needs to sit down and make a proper decision. And when I say someone, I'm talking about the politicians. To make a decision, the department needs to decide whether or not it's going to build a new school at Castletown, a new secondary school for the south of the Isle of Man. Now, the school is getting on in its years, and it needs replacing. They've started some of the work in terms of the field at the one side where they're going to put the new playing fields. And I think the uncertainty does create a problem in terms of where is it going, when are we going to have a new school, and is it going to incorporate our new swimming pool? And the answer to that is yes, it should. And please, can somebody keep the public informed as to the timescale for when the school's going to start to be developed?
Seems to cut across the ambition the Chief Minister has and the KPMG various reports that came out, and of course to up the population to 100,000. So if we are going to need more people, we'll need better schools. And the thing is, Castle Rushen School itself is a fine entity. The building is knackered and is falling down, and the staff are making the most of it. But it seems to cut across the government's ambition, how can you grow a population when you have a crumbling school in Castletown?
Well,
as you say, what's a better advert than a brand new school?
Well, absolutely, and I mean it'll take if you start now to start your planning and then start the contracts, start the development, you're talking at least 5 years before a new school from today would be completed. So you're already talking 5 years. I think the other thing is that when we talk about increasing the population, if that's the aim, and it clearly seems to be the aim, there are implications to that which are clearly and were clearly identified in the 80s when this started happening, in the 70s and 80s, which are that you have a knock-on effect to all your services. You need more schoolrooms, you need more doctors, you need, hopefully the hospital's big enough because it was built to be big enough for a bigger population. But, you have an infrastructure that has to be enhanced as well. So it's not just a matter of saying, let's do that. You have to do the other side. And I presume that the Chief Minister and his team have identified this and are working towards improving and enhancing the infrastructure of the Isle of Man to make sure this can all be accommodated.
A message in just to say to us from Julian, just talking about the current situation of the swimming pool, the southern pool. He's a big swimmer down there. Permanent closure for all day Sundays and most of Wednesdays as well. And I think, what do you think of, and again, it's the hand, we talked about the hand that MNH has been dealt by Treasury. What do you think about the hand that the southern, the swimming board has been dealt?
Well, I was involved partly in this because I had people approach me. And to be honest, it's quite straightforward. The funding of the swimming pool is a government responsibility. That's the capital cost and the operational cost. The local authorities pay and I think that's slightly increased now, but did pay at that time, a 2.5 pence rate equivalent income to contribute towards the administration of the pool. Now, that was determined in the 1970s. That policy has proceeded right through. What seems to come out from government is they even use the term, the pool's insolvent. It's not a company. It can't be insolvent in that sense.
It's a statutory.
Absolutely, statutory board, and funded by Tynwald through the Department of Education and whatever its other title is.
Statutory boards can't go bust.
No, because ultimately Tynwald has to fund them. So there seems to be a bit of confusion from what I can gather, and certainly there was with the Southern Swimming Pool, that in fact they had a problem because they were being told that they that there wasn't the resources to fund the pool. It's nonsense. Why is the pool shut on a Sunday when children are off school? That's the very time families and children can get together. So lots of parents work on a Saturday. Sunday is the one day they can go to the swimming pool with their children. We're not seeing these restrictions brought into the NSC. Why is it being brought into the Southern Pool? Purely because they are being underfunded to ensure that the pool can operate in the way it's always been envisaged and always was funded.
So is there a way out this for the Swimming Pool Board?
Well, there is, and political pressure is what it's called. And don't forget, 6 of the MHKs in Tynwald represent the areas that are components of the Southern Swimming Pool. So they can, I would have thought, bring reasonable pressure on those in positions of authority to make this properly get funded.
A message in now, just regarding... this is about building the population from Will. What does Mr. Brown think of the temporary suspension of the work permit system?
I have to say I'm confused. I don't know why they've done that. They already made changes to the work permit system to allow professionals to come in without the need for permits and to other areas. I'm not sure the benefit of scrapping it altogether, albeit temporarily, is going to bring to the Isle of Man. I'm not really sure what that's about, and I don't think it's actually been explained how it actually will benefit the Isle of Man. The work permit system can respond very quickly if it's a case that's clearly justified, and it's meant to be a way of controlling who we let into the island to work in the island, because potentially there could be problems. I mean, its origins go back to, it was brought in because of the building trade, because they were concerned at that time, the House of Keys, that there was uncontrolled, to use a term which isn't right for work permits, but immigration. In other words, we can't control immigration because that's part of our UK agreement, but we have the right to control employment. And that was how they used it. So I'm not really sure why it's been rescinded to allow it to be an open door.
Lots to get through between now and 1 with former Chief Minister Tony Brown on Manx Radio. Get in touch by text, call, email or WhatsApp.
Athol Garage in Ballasalla is more than a Nissan authorised repair centre. Their team of highly factory-trained and experienced technicians will service and repair any make and model with dedicated aftercare too. With Athol, you get a competitive fixed-price menu and a courtesy car if needed. Pity this driver didn't know that.
Oh, great! I told you to go to Athol!
Athol, a garage to swear by, not swear at. Book now at athol.im or call the A-Team, 820082.
There's a new way to Subway with 2 fantastic menus. Which will you go for? The all-new Subway series with 15 irresistible creations like the Big Bombay Sub, Great Goddess Salad, Emperor Wrap and Big Cheesesteak Sub Melt. Or create your own. You pick the ingredients you want and build your own sub, salad or wrap the way you want it. There's a great mix of healthy and indulgent menu items available from Subway and ShopRite, Peel and Port Erin.
We are ready to go at B&B Furniture with a wide range of manager specials throughout the store. If it says I'm ready to go, then it is ready to go. Priced in-store for immediate delivery and no long wait for stock to arrive onto the island. Get the furniture you're longing for with no wait, no deposit required and 0% finance available when you get ready to go at B&B Furniture. It's all here under one roof at the B&B Furniture 3-storey showroom in Snugborough.
B&B Furniture.
The
The summer furniture sale is on now at Riley's in Cool Road, Braddon, with up to 25% off top brand ranges like Norfolk Leisure and Pacific Lifestyle, so you can relax for less. Riley's. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
Have you ever wondered what makes people want to do this?
Go!
Join me, Beth Espy, for the Journey to a Dream podcast, where I talk to riders about why they want to race here on the Isle of Man.
You can't even explain it in words, like a bit like Grand Theft Auto, the video game. Feeling of petrol and stuff running through your veins, it just, it just feels amazing.
If you're outside the sport, it looks absolutely mad. I think there's other two types of people, really. People who want to do it and people who don't.
Journey to a Dream, available to download at motorsport.manxradio.com or your favourite podcast provider.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Former Chief Minister Tony Brown is with us, just talking about, Richard dropped a note in just to say this is concerning heritage railways. Rumour has it that they're planning massive cuts to the heritage. What's rumour? That's just skeet. That they're planning massive cuts to heritage railways. Yet they're an integral part of our history as well as tourist industry. Just ask Tony, says Richard, why doesn't he think the government values heritage, not just from a tourist point of view, but also, us, the people who live on the Isle of Man?
Yeah, I find it quite strange, to be honest, why there is not this understanding of the value in the Isle of Man of our unique heritage, which is different to the normal British heritage, because our origins are Celtic, Viking and so on. And we have lots of things here that people would bite your hand off for. Charles Gard's video, if you saw that one about the horse trams, I mean, he was absolutely right. Here you have a collective of steam trains, electric trams, horse trams, and yet they're not being given the importance that they should be given. You had the cruise ship in last week, right? And the horse trams weren't operating. You wait 30 minutes for a horse tram to go on a 10-minute ride now to nowhere, basically. You dumped off by the Villa Marina at a junction. I mean, the visitors got off the cruise ship and the horse tram's a mile away, but it was shut, by the way, because it was Monday. These schedules for the cruise ships are given out about 12 to 18 months beforehand. Why did nobody know in authority that the actual cruise ships were coming in with about 3,000 people getting off those ships who want to use our unique transport system?
Gary on 476, what's Mr Brown's opinion on the current culture within the civil service and Isle of Man government? Lots of this has been referenced and sort of side references by the Chief Minister that it needs to be improved, Ian even saying that the current culture is toxic. Was it toxic in your time?
Well, I didn't think so. But then I was in there, so maybe people outside thought that it was. I only can say that I found that the vast majority, and certainly the senior civil servants, were respectful of the minister's positions and did their work as they were required to do. Like anything, in middle management there were some ups and downs, but they were usually dealt with because at the end of the day, the chief executive of a department has the responsibility under the minister's direction to ensure that the department operates effectively. As far as politicians are concerned, and I can't judge today, I'm not in there, but the principles are quite simple. I mentioned it before. The minister is the department. The minister makes a decision. It's the responsibility of the chief executive and his or her officers to carry out the instructions, decisions of the minister. Pretty straightforward, really.
Okay, I mean, big names when you were there, Fred Kissack, Della Fletcher and people like that. And I mean, if you wanted something done, was it generally done?
It was definitely done. I can tell you that now. And if it wasn't, there was trouble. You don't leave it, you find out why is it not being done, and if necessary, disciplinary action was taken.
You were a minister in, health and social security, local government and environment, tourism and leisure, transport, and as well as chief minister as well. Where did you feel you were most effective?
It's quite hard to say. I think, I felt anyway, that local government and the environment was the one I was most effective with. In terms that we were going through a housing crisis, which we took great efforts to resolve. We were buying houses off the shelf, to use a term, from developers who were just building on spec, so we could house our people quicker. We had government mortgage schemes that were providing support for many young people who couldn't get into the housing ladder, and for older ones we brought in a scheme where regardless of your age you could get a mortgage. And I know one family, for example, I mean they've passed on now, where the elderly parents who were, I say elderly, that's the wrong term really, but the parents who were just coming up to 60 actually got a mortgage, and because of it they moved out of a public sector house. And what happened is the mortgage scheme was set up so that when they passed on, then the government got its money back from the sale of the property, and the family got whatever the balance was. So there are ways to deal with it. The other one is, we dealt with different things like refuse. We had a comprehensive refuse facility and policy, reuse, resource, and dispose and so on, recycle, all done in there. In that, we looked at reconstructing local government into 13 local authorities, and it only failed because council ministers wouldn't support it. It went to Tynwald because a member moved it there, and it only lost it because council ministers didn't support it. But it would have been, I think, a much better system than we've now got for local government, which is actually, I think, a bit of an issue.
There's lots of disquiet amongst younger people about getting onto the property ladder, and as you say, in local government, and you were there 5 years, so you got a handle on it. What was your perception then of moving that along and getting young kids onto the property ladder and getting them properties?
Well, my view is I suppose pretty straightforward. Whether it's old-fashioned now, I don't know, but I mean, I'm not a big fan of shared equity. I think has its limitations. Because the Isle of Man relies on the UK high street banks to provide mortgages, then what we have is a situation where their schemes are set up to operate effectively within the United Kingdom and are not necessarily good enough for the Isle of Man in terms of their flexibility. And the only way I think you overcome this is by government having a government mortgage scheme which is specifically aimed at helping those who wouldn't necessarily get a mortgage from the general high street lenders, and you can then fill that gap to some degree.
I want to talk to you about getting into politics, and your route into politics involved a motorcycle accident. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Were you DJing then?
I was DJing then. I'd been DJing for some years before that, and I suppose that in itself, the 7:30 disco, which I was a component of in terms of the committee and setting it up, gave me some insight into committee work and managing things. And the motorcycle accident, after that, I got into politics.
So let me get this right. The 7:30 disco, did you lose the venue and campaign to get the venue back? Is that right?
No. It just, in a way, faded away.
Right.
It had run for about 7 or 8 years. It was a voluntary organisation. It used to be held in the what is now St Mary's on the Harbour in Castletown, which was then the church rooms, and we used to have 300 young people every week in there, and it was, of course, alcohol-free venue, and it was very, very popular, and it used to be packed out.
So you had the what were you riding, by the way, when you had the accident? What was it?
650 Yamaha.
Oh, crikey! Where was the accident?
The Whitestone Garage.
You were in hospital for how long?
3 weeks in hospital, and then about another 6 weeks convalescing, and about another year and a half before I was reasonably right again.
And mulling it over, politics came into your head?
Well, no, I'd been asked even in the days of the disco, I was being encouraged to stand for the commissioners, but I was only 20, so they were full of old men. Why would I, as a 20-year-old, want to get involved in that? That was my view at the time, which I suppose would be reflected by most people even today. And the commissioners had a lot more responsibilities than they do today. They were responsible for highways, sewers, housing, all sorts of things. And it just evolved. After the accident, I had such a response from people in Castletown. And I was convalescing when the election came up, and I was encouraged to stand, which I did, and I topped the poll by 200 and something votes. Biggest turnout they'd ever had, 64% turnout.
Presumably you got your pals to be voting, is that right?
Well, I did.
Did you do any canvassing?
Oh, I did canvassing, but I mean, there was a short time between it because, of course, the House of Keys election was in November of that year, so we only literally had a couple of weeks. But I think the big thing that came out of it was it brought out a lot of young voters to vote, and they were coming out because I was a young person standing, and they wanted to support me. And I got a lot of support from older people in the town who said, let's give this young fella a chance.
Okay, let's get to the lines again. Juan's on now. Hi, Juan. You're live with Tony Brown.
Afternoon, Andy. Hi, Tony. How are you?
Hi, Juan.
Yeah. Tony, a couple of things. I totally support what you're saying about the Manx National Heritage, and I think this administration, probably the administration before, will probably be remembered for helping take the Manxness away from the Isle of Man a little bit with what's happening. And a sense of a belonging, I think, which is happening all over the place at the moment, with people not feeling a sense of community belonging, which is part of the big global agenda. But I pick up on your points before. The minister is in charge of the department, and I've approached a couple of ministers on this programme about that. But I do align with the fact that if a minister is not competent in that department and has not done his relative studies in that department, then he takes the advice from the chief executive or the civil servants that are in that department. So they're left holding the baby, and the chief executives have got no responsibility and walk away from it. So I would suggest there that maybe some of the ministers are not aligned fully with a lot of the facts and take their information from the chief executives.
Okay, let's take that one first.
Yeah, I would answer that by saying that basically it's about commitment. I mean, a minister, and I did, will always take advice from officers. They will give options, they will give advice because they're doing the detailed work, they will provide papers. The minister has to assess what's being recommended to him, and the minister has to consider whether or not they think that's appropriate for the way the Isle of Man should go forward, or appropriate way to deal with the issue that's before them. So there's nothing different now to then in terms of the officers giving advice. That's how the system works and always has worked. Ultimately, the public expect, and I expect, that the person who is elected makes the decision. And the whole system was set up, the ministerial system, to focus responsibility on a minister so that they were answerable directly for the actions of their department. No one else, just the minister. Now, they might have members on the department, but they would work under the delegation of the minister and only have certain powers. But ultimately, the minister is the one that's held to account by the chief minister and is held to account by Tynwald. And that's absolutely right. The system is pretty straightforward in that way. Where you have a problem is if a minister isn't competent, or if a minister is not able to grasp the issues, then I think that's a matter for the chief minister to judge, and if necessary, take action that they feel necessary. But there is a learning curve. Ministers will take time to learn. Critically, it's important that they understand their legislation. Critically, it's important that they question the officers. They challenge the officers. They should be acting as if they were Joe Bloggs the public, trying to find out why an officer is recommending a certain course of action and whether or not it's actually reasonable to take that decision. And sometimes they will have to make decisions that are unpopular. I did. You have to, or the island couldn't go forward.
Okay, Juan?
Yeah, in government PR terms, there's quite a bit to unpack in that one, but I think that basically it boils down to what I said there, Tony, in respect of whether the ministers are competent and actually study what they're being told by the chief execs. I mean, the overspends that we've had recently, I mean, there's always been overspends on the prison and the courtrooms, but the overspends recently have been terrible. Even talk to politicians in the UK, they can't understand the amount of overspend. And again, like I said just before, the minister is held accountable and is holding the baby, where the chief executive walks off with a big pension, and all our money's being spent. And that brings me on to my second question, really, with the equality and social governance that is going on around the world at the moment. At what stage does the Isle of Man government stop having teeth and the UK crack the whip over here with certain regulations of things?
Which particular regulations, Juan?
Basically, well, obviously you've got your VAT agreements and stuff like that, but basically on the immigration into the island, the type of people we be taking in, and all the other stuff that's going on with, let's say, the woke agenda, which seems to be the buzzword at the moment. But there seems to be an approach by government of taking these agendas in over here, which, as you said before, quite rightly, we're quite unique on the Isle of Man, and a lot of this stuff is not going to work here, and it's not going to go down well here. So, at what stage does the Isle of Man government turn around and say, no, we don't want that here?
Right. First thing I think to clarify is the Isle of Man is actually independent, as you know, of the United Kingdom. We're not part of the United Kingdom, never have been. So our type of system is different to that in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. We are not a devolved parliament in that way. We actually were there before Westminster established a parliament. And because of that, that's always been acknowledged and taken into account in how we operate. As far as immigration is concerned, the Isle of Man, because we're not a sovereign state, actually has the British government providing immigration controls, and our officers work under the regulations issued by the United Kingdom. We have no choice in that while we have the agreement we have. So whatever the UK decide as the rules for immigration apply in the Isle of Man, exactly the same. VAT is exactly the same. These apply because we allow them to apply in the Isle of Man, because over the years and up to date, the Isle of Man has not felt that it wants to go down the road of being a sovereign state, i.e. fully independent. So therefore it influences certain things. It doesn't mean immigration you can't change much, but certainly in VAT, the Isle of Man has over years been successful in negotiating some variances within the VAT agreement. For example, tourism was 5% in the Isle of Man, whereas it was 20% in the United Kingdom. Why? Because you can't export the tourist accommodation product, but you can export, for example, if you manufacture goods. So there were ways of overcoming that, and Donald Gelling successfully did that.
Okay, all right. June, sorry, we're going to dash on because there's lots to do, but thanks for calling today, June.
Cheers, Andy.
Okay.
Thank you.
I remember talking to Tony about the election. Apparently that the square was mobbed with people when you were elected. Is that right? You filled the Castletown Square? Yeah,
it was. I mean, we were all surprised. In those days, the town hall used to be where Coffee Craft is now, which is the big building in the square opposite Barclays Bank. And I can remember we were upstairs in the boardroom doing the count, and there was a lot of sound, clearly, of people outside in the square. Usually the election results were out by about 9 o'clock. There was maybe 30 or 40 people there. And the Inspector of Police, Derek Nicholson, looked out the window and went, oh my goodness. And the square was absolutely chock-a-block with people, and he had to get on the radio to get police officers down because there was no police. They hadn't expected it. And the count didn't finish till just after 12 o'clock. And when we came out, there was over 1,000 people there. It was absolutely phenomenal.
Okay, very quickly, could you ask Tony Brown to explain clearly the difference between loan through shared equity and government mortgage? It sounds like government should take the risk that the banks wouldn't.
Yeah, well, the shared equity, of course, means that there is somebody else who has a component of your property, and that you don't totally own your property. If you get a government mortgage, and I'm one who, without the government mortgage in the late 1970s, my wife and I wouldn't have bought our house. We couldn't have done it. It means that the government can waive, or not waive, that's the wrong word, but can create a mortgage system that meets our needs. And for example, we could buy an old house in Castletown, which lots of people did, that were on the market, and do them up. And we got a mortgage from government which was 100% with a small grant. It meant we could afford a mortgage. And we don't have that today. One is some of these banks are reluctant to give a mortgage out to an old property, and the other is you need at least 25% in most cases before they'll give a mortgage for the other 75%. Government can avoid that and help people.
Do you think the government should be getting involved?
Yes, I think because we're an island and because the pressures on the island are different. In other words, we have a small amount of land that's available for housing development. We have a population that requires housing, and housing is important for everybody. And it's far better to give people the opportunity to buy the houses than to have them renting in the private sector, paying high rents, or renting in the public sector and not moving out. So give opportunities where you can. The carrot is always better than the stick.
So I asked you at the start of the programme to tell us then, what was your most proud achievement? Where do you think you made the most difference? 30 years in Keys, in the ministerial portfolio, commissioners?
Well, without a doubt, I mean, being minister in departments was the greatest influence I had in general terms, directly affecting things. There's no doubt as Chief Minister I was able to influence the overall policy of government right across government and make the teams work together. And in fact, I'm the only Chief Minister that retained all his ministers for his full 5-year term. And that's not because they were creeping to me, it's because they were doing their job effectively and we had clear direction on where we wanted to go. And I hope we made a difference that helped many, many people. Certainly our involvement was to care about the island. I think there's a lack of care and pride at the moment from certain areas. I mean, you come off the plane, you look at the state of the airport garden now, it's terrible. It looks like a cabbage patch, to be honest. You go out to the plane, you walk through those covers and they're dirty. They need washing down. They should be washed every morning, first thing, before the first flight. It's the impression it gives. So I think my greatest is just being able to represent the people of the Isle of Man and doing the best I could.
Okay, thanks for being with us today.
My
Former
pleasure.
Chief Minister Tony Brown, and we're back with another open line tomorrow. Thanks to Howie on the phones today.
WINT.
Mike has got the Conister feeling.